Okay, this is an exercise to go with the content page on periodical sources. So this is a practice session to help you have a sense of when you're searching through the database, the school database, online database, and you see the title of a periodical. This will help you practice your being able to identify what exact kind of periodical that is. So try to identify to the best of your ability whether the following sources are newspaper, journal, magazines, or journals, and I will help you by providing the answer immediately afterwards. So we've got Journal of Agronomy and Crop Science, and there are 3 choices, and oddly enough, this one is a journal. Most things that are titled journals are journals, and notice how, but that's not, you can tell not just, this one is just by the word journal, and you can also see a word like agronomy, which is a very technical scientific term, and crop science, the word science in it. So this is a scientific publication, and most scientific publications are journals. They're quarterly journals. Farmers Weekly, okay, are 3 choices there. Now notice this is the same topic, okay, growing stuff, but we've got a magazine this time. Weekly, magazines are weekly, journals are quarterly, magazines are weekly or monthly. Magazines are weekly or monthly. Another clue, though, that this is a magazine is notice how sort of user-friendly the title is. Farmers Weekly. That seems very approachable, understandable. You yourself are not a farmer, chances are, but you see something like Farmers Weekly and that doesn't seem intimidating the way that Journal of Agronomy and Crop Science would be intimidating. The very title of that previous publication tells you it's for specialists. The title of this publication tells you it's for less technically advanced types. Maritime Policy and Management. Which one do you think it is? How about magazine? Journals tend to be published by academic types and for academic types. There are some professionals, certain kinds of professionals in fields that are have a sort of academic leaning that would read journals. However, most professional publications are on the magazine level. So words like policy and management, maritime policy and management, that sounds like it's a magazine for people who are in charge of shipping, boats and stuff like that, and I mean ships carrying cargo ships. So that would be a magazine there. New York, Amsterdam News. News being the great giveaway. This is a newspaper. Most of the things that have news in them will be newspapers. However, also notice that most of the things that have a city name in them will also be a newspaper. Although there are things like The New Yorker, which is a magazine, or New York, which is also a magazine. So not just everything with New York in it is a newspaper, but pretty much anything that has the name of another city in it, chances are it's a newspaper, unless it's a magazine. I can picture some cities around the country having magazines, although none of them would be, I think, serious sources of information for the most part. Never mind, I'm wandering. Okay, Alberta News Magazine. Now this one, I love this one because that's got the news from newspaper, but magazine from magazine in it. And when you get this news and magazine combination, it's leaning toward magazine. Okay, so it'll be a magazine. Would it basically be is the kind of stories that you'd be getting in a newspaper, only expanded out in more depth. Maybe a newspaper would be published every the newspaper every weekend has a supplement, and so this would maybe be in the supplement for the newspaper. Longer stories, just as readable as newspaper stories are, so it has that accessibility advantage, but would go into more depth with more information. Newspaper stories tend to be a little on the spare side. Current events. Pretty vague, pretty general, abstract idea. Current events where, when. A magazine, okay? So you have current events, another way of saying news stories. Notice, however, it's not going to specialize in any particular area. These will be news stories from all over the country, the United States, and all over the world, perhaps. So it'll have news stories, but being on the magazine level and being so sort of broadly aimed, I wouldn't expect anything like this to be in depth. The quality of the information in here is not going to be particularly high in terms of college level study. However, in terms of accessibility, there would be a very accessible, easy to read kind of source. International Journal of Computer Mathematics. This could not be anything except a journal. Okay, got the word journal in it, and also computer mathematics is an academic field of study, so that has to be a journal. Milwaukee Journal. Ooh, now is that a journal also? No, it's not. It's a newspaper. You can tell it's a newspaper. It has a city name in it. Sometimes things called journals are newspapers. The Wall Street Journal, for example, is a newspaper. It's published daily. The Wall Street Journal is an interesting case because it's a newspaper. However, it has, in its news stories, fairly high-level, high-quality information in there. It's a newspaper that is geared toward professionals, so rather than be general, spare, rather than having just basic information or maybe being sensational in their stories, it's going to go in more in depth in the story. So the Wall Street Journal would be a very good source for all sorts of kinds of stories. The Village Voice. Okay, very vague. What on earth is that? This is actually a very famous thing published in New York, and it is a newspaper. However, this is what you don't know is this is an interesting kind of newspaper. This is a newspaper that is published weekly. So the stories it has can actually be in more depth than your average newspaper. The stories will have more words per story, fewer stories in an issue for the most part. The Village Voice is actually a kind of a model. It's an early version, for maybe the first version of things that have sprung up all over the country. For example, The Stranger in Seattle, or the volcano here in Tacoma. The volcano would be, if you look at the volcano, doesn't really have that many stories in it, and they're pretty small for the most part. You look at The Stranger, and they'll actually have longer stories, some of which have some very good research in them, journalism in them. Especially, I think, their political stories can have some really good journalism involved in them. So some of these news weeklies, these weekly free newspaper things, the Village Voice you have to pay for, but something weekly free newspaper like The Stranger or the Seattle Weekly can have some pretty good stories in it. Financial Times, some of you may be familiar with it. This is a magazine, okay, but a very professional magazine that has stories, news stories from around the world, a very high reputation for its journalism. However, being a magazine, it is still aiming for a certain amount of accessibility. So something like the Financial Times could be kind of a best of both worlds, and that would be relatively easy for you to read and yet have high level, high quality information in it. Milwaukee Sentinel, Milwaukee again, so that would have to be a newspaper, okay, yet another newspaper. Public interest. Notice a vague general kind of title, similar to that current events. So once again, a magazine. However, something like, if you think about current events, that sounds pretty vague, could cover a whole bunch of things. And the thing is, sort of like, the more general, the more widespread the subject matter in a magazine, the lower quality it's going to be. More accessible, but lower quality. And when you're writing for college, you want to balance those out. You want to have something that's accessible that you can read, but you still want to have something that makes a good impression on your instructor. So you want to have things that are sort of as complicated as you can possibly handle, sort of sophisticated as you can possibly handle. A term, when it says public interest, it sounds more specific than something like current events. And so this would be a higher quality source than the current events one was. And I think this might be the last one. Mobility Forum, the Journal of Air Mobility's Command Magazine. I just love the title of this thing, especially it's a journal of a magazine. That I like a lot. I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but I'm pretty sure it's a magazine. But something like this is a military publication. Since it's writing for a specialty audience, fellow people in the military, the information in here I would expect would be more sophisticated and technically advanced than something you'd get in maybe like the Tacoma News Tribune. Maybe it covers some of the same stories, but from a more sophisticated perspective. Okay, and that's the end of that. So hopefully this will give you a better sense of what exactly the sources that you're looking at when you do the online research through the portal, which I will explain to you in the video, hopefully in the next day or two.